Hey, welcome back. All right, so today I'm gonna do things a little bit differently. I'm gonna be talking about this guy. We're gonna do a Speargun build. I built this a while ago, but I'm gonna run you through the process. Stick with me, hope you like it. So I started here with some wenge and purple heart because I think they're pretty and they're really unique and they're very stable woods. And so I cut these into strips and I got some marine epoxy mixed up and did every layer. I would do some trial and error runs first to get used to how it's gonna work and then clamp it up really well, let it sit overnight and let it cure up. It's very important. And then that's the blank. When it's all done, I ran it through the planer and squared it off and look how nice that came out. It's ready to get the track put into it. So then I made a little router sled that pinches the outside of the blank so it doesn't wobble at all and it cuts the track perfectly straight. So that's a special dovetail router bit I'll get to later. You're gonna wanna use a heavy duty router. I use a 1 3/4 horsepower, it's a Porter cable. And because I chose to go with an enclosed track for this build, I got this from Neptonics. I ordered the track and the router bit from them. I would suggest ordering them together if you decide to go with an enclosed track. I'm gonna talk more later about why you should or should not use an enclosed track, but for this build I chose to. So this is the router bit. It's heavy duty, it's super high quality. I really recommend it. They go really well together. The difference is it does have a 1/2 inch base. So you're gonna need to use the extra sleeve that comes with your router. It's really easy to swap it out and it fits perfectly. I would also take the plunge option off of your router because you're not gonna wanna use a plunge for this.
Yeah, baby. Woo!
And so that's a very scary part of the build. Just make sure that your blank is longer than you need it to be so you can cut the end of it off in case you have any imperfections like you see here. And then I took some other scrap and I epoxied them together into the blank for my handle. And it's just a long process of cutting and removing any material that you don't want. I would put your spearfishing glove on when you're doing this too to make it fit. And that top section is what's actually gonna get wedged up into the blank. So make sure you have that top piece so you have something to attach to the main part of the gun. And it came out really nice. I'm really happy with it. And so here I actually drill this hole first before I put the handle into it because that's where the trigger is going to drop into. That way you can put your handle where you need to so you have the proper distance of the trigger and the handle. If it's too far forward or too far back, it's just not going to feel right. So really spend your time figuring out your ergonomics. And I really spent some time here removing some material from the bottom of the blank so I can cut and wedge that handle up in there. And now they're epoxied together and they're one unit. And we're just gonna clean up the rest of that later. And here I decided to go with an Hermes double roller reverse trigger mechanism, which I highly recommend. I think it's the best, the smoothest one on the market, and it's very affordable. So I spent a long time chiseling this out and really spending my time making sure it was perfect and in line with the track. A few hours of routing and chiseling. Got this pocket dug out for the handle. Let's drop this thing in here. Which works. I think this is a good time to talk about patience. I've been a woodworker for quite a long time, and the key to success with being a woodworker is vision and patience and little more. Talent is a byproduct, just practice. So these things take a lot of time. You can't rush them. One mistake will cost you hours, days, weeks. So really just take your time with these things, be patient, get yourself in a mindset that says, I don't care how long this is gonna take me. When you're doing precision work, like dropping the trigger mechanism into the blank that you spent so much time making, really take your time. Do a couple shaves, check it again. Couple more shaves, check it again. Again, be patient, it takes time. All right. And then right here, I realized that my gun was not as wide as I needed it to be in the front, so I added some more strips of the marine epoxy and made it wider. It's gonna make it more buoyant and give me some room for my roller bearings. And then I'm gonna take my hand plane to it and flatten the top out after the glue up is all done, just to make it smooth and nice and flat. It came out pretty good, check that out. All right, we got that trigger mech installed, sitting in there, not pinned in. I got the tracking laid for the first time, fits perfect. And now I'm gonna see if the shaft will slide in and lock into place. See if it all lines up, moment of truth. So, lock this guy in here. Pull this back. Need to depress the trigger mechanism to get it in place. Oh, let's see. That's in there. Yup. And here I still have to do a little bit more removal. And you're gonna find this along the way. As you're going, you're just gonna have to keep making adjustments. There wasn't quite enough room for the line release, so I just keep chiseling out and sanding and using the rasp until everything fits right. So this is part of the patience. You just have to be prepared to make mistakes and correct them down the road. Everything can be fixed. And now we're going to get into a little bit of the metal work. I used a lot of raw stainless steel I bought used for really cheap, and this is my safety mechanism, kind of designed after the Aimrite. And this is not a tutorial on metalworking, but just make sure you always use oil when whatever you're working with, take your time and wear eye protection. And that's the big moo. He loves hanging out with me, all 17 pounds of him. And now we get into the scariest part of the build, putting the roller bearings into place. So I start by marking them out perfectly, and then I'm gonna line them up with the chisel to make sure that they're exactly where they need to be. Now I also made sure the forward ones were wider than the rear ones because the rear one is loaded first and I don't want the bands to cross over each other and bunch up on top of the gun. I want them to lay flat. So I start hogging them out with a router, and you can see here that I snapped a router bit. It is really important to wear eye protection when you're using a router because these bits do shatter and they can go right into your face, so be careful. And so I hog it out with a router a little at a time, and then I finish up with my chisel. And these are the Manny Sub roller bearings. They're ceramic. I highly recommend them. And I won't lie, this is probably the scariest part of the whole build for me for some reason. It's just not something I could really easily fix if I messed it up. So I'm drilling the hole where the bearings are gonna go, the bearing axle, and you have basically one shot at this. So I checked it a million times to make sure it was perfectly centered, and I had the bearings with me just to line them up and where the hole was gonna go and how deep it had to go. Make sure everything was perfectly square and flat, and everything is clamped down. I used a level. I did everything I could to make sure these were drilled perfectly. Now, this is just something I chose to do. I don't think it's that necessary, but I did take that router bit you can see there on the right, the red one, and I did create space for the bands to sit so they don't stick above the gun. So you can use this bit right here. You can also use that for your partially enclosed track, just a smaller one. And right here, this is what it looks like when it's Ready for bearings. And now I'm gonna mark the gun for material removal. I want the gun to be flat, and so it tracks well in the water. So I'm just gonna start marking it and cutting things away a little at a time with different saws. I'm gonna talk more about that in a minute. But yeah, it's now shaping the gun. So taking that blank and cutting it down into an ergonomic and really cool looking piece of wood. And obviously I don't have a lot of footage of these things. I have mostly pictures. This was done a long time ago, so I did lose some of that footage. I don't know where it went, but you don't really need it. A lot of this is just removing material right now. And I use various tools, chisels, rasps, files, some of my different saws. You're just trying to take all the bulk of it out to make it as sleek as possible and make it hydrodynamic in the water so it sweeps back and forth and you have enough bulk to handle all the inlays into the gun. And here are my overly pretentious line anchors, and you don't need to do them like this. I just thought that they were cool, and they keep the bands again from overlapping each other so they lay flat. And then here's a little bit more metal work. That's the trigger guard, which you are going to need. I just heat that up and bent it, and then I inlaid it and screwed it into place with a little bit of epoxy. That'll keep it from hitting your trigger on accident. And that's a line guide inlaid into there. I would just buy that. They're pretty cheap, and there's no need to make one, but you do need one. And that's the bottom. That's where you're gonna put a loop so you can clip it to a tagline or clip it to your belt. That's a really handy thing to have. And then on the side, obviously the gun has been oiled now. And that's it, looking all sleek, getting pretty close to finish. Oh yeah. And one more shot here. All right, so you probably noticed there's a couple gaps in this project right now, so I'm gonna fill in the blanks here. After I had it all shaped down, I sanded it to about 800 grit, and I think the finer the better for that, because I'm not using an epoxy finish on this. I'm just using oil, and the oil that I used was boiled linseed. And teak oil is also a great option. I just didn't have any at the time, and I did have boiled linseed. They're both great options. And then I did all the metal work. So the metal work is all the inlays, like the trigger guard, the base on the handle, which is what clips to your tagline, and a couple other things like the wishbone stopper. The wishbone stopper that's in the picture is not the one that I ended up using ultimately. I had to make my own and bend a flat piece of metal into a U shape and then fit that. It takes time, be patient. So then I took the whole gun out for a test run, and all I did was just take it in the water and let it go and to see how neutrally it dropped. Is it front heavy? Is it back heavy? You know, I just wanted to check its buoyancy, and I took it back out and rebalanced it. So it was a little bit front heavy. So what I ended up doing is making another piece and hogging out the front end, and I did fill this with high density foam, which is the same foam you'd use to fill a carbon barrel. And then I added a little bit of epoxy and I clamped it into place. And just this little bit of buoyancy made a pretty big difference. And it looks a little bit funky, but it doesn't get in the way of anything. And I'm glad that I did it. And then I took one local slipper brand, and I cut it and I put it on the butt of the gun for loading, just because I thought it was a cool local touch and it looks rad. It'll protect the gun too. And then here you can see on the outside, I ended up gluing more wenge to the outside, which protects the bearings and it gives it more flotation. And I cleaned it up after. I'm really glad I did that because it's perfectly balanced now. Now I'm going to cut the end of the spear off. I'm going to shorten the spear a little bit, which will lighten it, and I'm going to make room for my slip tip because I don't need the tip, I don't need the flopper on it, so I'm just going to cut that off with my angle grinder. Again, wear eye protection because these things can go flying. And it's good to have a fire extinguisher too in case you light something on fire, because you can. And then that's the slip tip installed. I did have to drill through the shaft here, and I had to peen it on. Most of the time you will thread it and screw it on, but this is easier. Okay, so let's discuss the track for a minute. The entire gun is built around the track. So when you start your process, keep that in mind. The first most important thing is that your track is absolutely straight. It's the center of your entire gun and everything is built around that, okay? So I chose to go with an enclosed track because I wanted to eliminate shaft whip and because I wanted to add as much power as I could to the shaft. Knowing what I know now, the enclosed track is not necessary. I think that a partially enclosed track would have done me just fine. It would have saved me a bit of money and a lot of time and effort. A partially enclosed track just kind of sits in the U and shaft slides inside of that. An enclosed track pinches around the shaft and the shark fins stick above that. I also had to shave my shark fins down quite a bit, so there's almost nothing there. I'll get to that in a minute. So if your track is absolutely straight and level and it doesn't have a wave to it, it's just straight, the gun's gonna shoot straight, as long as everything is aligned perfectly. So if I was to do it again, I would not go with an enclosed track. The other problem with an enclosed track is the vacuum effect. So my enclosed track is made to fit a 9mm shaft. If I were to use a 9mm shaft, the suction that it creates as the shaft is leaving the track would actually slow the shaft down significantly and counterbalance all the effects that I would want an enclosed track to do. So I'm using an 8mm shaft. So it does have room between the shaft and the outer wall of the track. So I don't have as much vacuum effect, but ultimately it wasn't necessary. Okay, let me show you what I mean. If I was to load the gun, the wishbones here would be pulled all the way back, the bands would be pulled back to load the gun, and they're going to hook on the back of the shark fins, right? And these are going to propel the shaft forward, okay? And as it comes down here, this is your wishbone stopper. So the shark fins have to pass below the top of that stopper so the shark fins don't catch on the wishbones, so the shaft can leave the gun freely. And here's a clip showing my line anchors and how nicely everything sits because of that. You see the inner ones are narrower than the wider ones, so they don't overlap. And after a couple adjustments, I did end up shortening those quite a bit, so it has more power. And here it is, all finished, oiled, polished, and ready for action. It feels really good in my hand. It's got great buoyancy, great balance. It shoots super smooth. It's incredibly powerful. It's extremely accurate. And the very first time I took it out hunting with a buddy, my very first trigger pull with this gun, I landed my very first uku. So I was super stoked, extremely serendipitous day. Yes, you. And here it is. To wrap it up. Great first day with that gun. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the process so far. Now let's put it all together. This is where it is today, okay? This gun's all done. If you notice, I swapped the reel out. I don't like the reel, not for blue water gun. I swapped it out to a breakaway setup. Breakaway setup attaches to this bungee, which loops onto my line release. It's on a triple wrap on this, so it has plenty of range, tons of power, and the breakaway setup clips directly to the line, which goes to the spear. And this is a bungee line, 75 feet of bungee. They make hundreds too, but if I need more, I'll clip a 50-foot tagline onto it. And I use a 3-atmosphere buoy. Ocean Hunter, you have to pump that up with a pump. It's 3 atmospheres of pressure. So basically you shoot your big fish, the whole line breaks away from the gun, and the buoy is on the surface with a lot of flotation, and the fish fights the bungee, pulls the buoy down, and the buoy just pulls it back up when it gets tired, and you fight the buoy back in. Okay? I have not had to do this yet. If you watched my first video, you know that I'm fairly new to blue water hunting. But the reason that I built this gun is because I actually did land a fish of a lifetime a few years ago. I landed a 102-pound ahi. This was the craziest day of my life. This is going to be entirely its own video at some point. On a shore dive by myself with my reef gun, with my Aimrite 110 carbon. It was a 40-meter reel, no float. I'm going to make it a separate video all about that. We don't need to talk about that today. But that's what inspired me to build this gun. I said, okay, if there's big fish out there and I can land it with a reef gun, I want to go for bigger fish. So I built this gun. Now let's talk specs. It is a 125 double roller, okay? I use reactive rubber. I highly recommend that. It's way better than traditional rubber. And I use twin 14s. I use 14s because they're faster than 16s are. And then with an 8mm shaft, it's plenty. So 16 mil bands would actually slow the shaft down. 14s are faster and they're easier to load. If I was gonna go with a bigger shaft, then I would go with 16s. But an 8mm is plenty for what I need. And I swapped the traditional flopper out for a slip tip. And slip tip punches through the fish, breaks away. Now the fish fights the line, so it doesn't have the spear to wiggle a hole and tear off, right? So it's much more efficient. Now, you'll notice I did add some things when I checked my flotation, right? I added the sides, I made it wider, I made it more buoyant, okay? Taking the reel off of the back made it even lighter, so it tracks very well in the water. It has tons of power, it's super accurate, and it has a lot of range. So that's where she is today. I really hope this helped. If you have any questions, please get a hold of me. I would love to help. There doesn't seem to be any full-length videos out there about how to make a spear gun, so I had to piece this together over months. This is probably the hardest project I ever did, and I'm really, really glad with how it turned out. You can't buy a gun like this. You have to make it. So if you want to help, let me know. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you guys next time. Shoot!